Hey everyone, and hey Carol, hey David, how are you
Hello.
doing?
Ronak. Hi, Ronak.
Hopefully, you're both doing well. And hello again to all of our attendees. I'm Ronak Sheth, founder and CEO of Lit Videobooks. So, if you're not familiar with Lit, we make learning from best-selling business books as fun and entertaining as watching a movie or a documentary. If you want more information, just stay tuned until the end of the conversation. But for now, let's settle in for what we think will be an awesome conversation about how to connect with others, build exceptional relationships at work, at home, with friends. And at the end, for the last 15 minutes, we're going to save time for Q&A. So there's a Slido link that you'll see in the chat. Please add any questions there and upvote the ones that you would like to see answered. So before we dive in, I'd love to share a little bit about your backgrounds with everyone. So, David, you've had an amazing career as a senior lecturer at Stanford Graduate School of Business. You helped create the Interpersonal Dynamics course, also known as Touchy Feely, and much of the school's leadership curriculum. You've also written several great books, such as Managing for Excellence, Influence Without Authority, and Power Up. And Carole, you were a lecturer in leadership at Stanford. You ran the Arbuckle Leadership Fellows Program. After that, you co-founded Leaders in Tech, bringing the lessons of Touchy Feely to Silicon Valley leadership and executives. And before that, you had a successful career in marketing and consulting. Very excited to have you both here today.
Thank you,
Good,
Ronak.
good. Yes, I was
So to
recruited by Stanford, 55 years ago to develop this course. And it started off very small, I think 24 students. And now it has grown so 85% of the MBAs take the course. It's seen as probably one of the most course to take, must course to take. And it's been very profound for many students. Many of them say it's been transformational. They use it at work and at home and so on. And I think about 20 years ago, Carole, you joined and
A little over 20 years ago.
helped to fine tune it and became the best teacher of the course.
Thank you.
it's amazing. I was actually it's a perfect tee up for what I was going to ask you. So, what for both of you, David and Carole, what inspired you to create the Touchy Feely course, and how did it lead you to then write Connect?
Well, I think
Well,
what inspired about the course was the high student demand. It was a course in which students kept on saying, this is a great course. Many of them say this is why I came to Stanford was because of the course. And students who couldn't get in demanded that we open more sections. And I think we found the course personally satisfying because we saw what it did to the students. And then we talked about writing a book.
in
Carole?
in fact, we had a editor for Penguin Random House who ultimately published the book uh, come to us and say, so why is there this course that thousands of students for decades have said was worth the entire price of tuition? Parenthesis and aside, that made us very popular with all of our colleagues. Uh, and there's no book. And we said, because you really can't learn about how to become more interpersonally competent by just reading about it in a book. And he said, well, how are you okay with the only people getting to learn this being those that are lucky enough and privileged enough to go to the Stanford Business School? And that's when David looked at me and said, I think we're going to have to write a book. And the reason it took us 3 years to write it, I don't know, it took us forever. It seemed like forever to write it, was that we were so committed to writing a book that would not be just a pick it up at the newsstand in New York and read it on the plane and get off in San Francisco and put it in your bookshelf. It's full of practical, go do this with what you just learned. And what's exciting about the Lit video book is that it similarly has a great incentives built into it with all the examples that you give for people to go do something with it. That was our biggest goal, was to produce something that would create some of the same conditions that the students experience, that turn this into such a transformative experience for them.
I mean, it was such a fun video book to produce. So thank you for allowing us to create a documentary style version of it. And Carole, this question is for you. So why do relationships at work matter so much?
Well, people do business with people. Lots of people stop at the thinking that they do business with ideas or products or plans or strategies. And yes, those things are important. We're not saying they're not. And often what gets overlooked is the importance of the fact that people do business with people, and getting the people part right turns out to be pretty important. And in fact, it's one of the reasons the course is at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. It's not hidden away somewhere in a psych department. And it's also the reason that Leaders in Tech, the organization, the nonprofit that I founded after I left Stanford, has been so successful, because all of we are a pre-IPO is our target market. So CEOs and founders of pre-IPO companies. The reason it's been so successful is that all of those folks have learned a lot about the hard skills, but not as much about the so-called soft skills, which David and I like to say are sometimes the hardest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so in the book, you talk a lot about relationships being similar to climbing a mountain with no endpoint. So we're gonna take a look at a clip from the video book that talks about this idea, and we'll chat further on the other side.
Relationships are like climbing the mountain. So you start off, it's a bright sunny day. The path is relatively level.
Which is like just what happens when you're starting out in a relationship. It's casual, it's pretty easy, you're kind of comfortable. And then as you start to climb, you notice that now you're noticing the climb a little bit.
You climb a little bit more, and the path gets a little steeper. And then you get to the place where you're before the head wall.
And that's even more challenging. But you help each other, and eventually you get over the head wall and you get to this beautiful upper meadow.
And you rest for a while, and you enjoy the relationship where it is.
But you notice that there's a summit.
And then you decide, do I want to go to the top? And that's another climb. I may not want to in this relationship. It may be enough just to stay there, or I may want to go to the top.
So you don't try to climb the summit with everybody, but you might have a few people who you've already gotten to the meadow with and think, I bet there's more. I bet there's even more we could do here. And that's who you embark on the climb to the summit with, and the summit is exceptional.
Now there's only one problem with this image, and that is when I climb, I can get to the top. But in relationships, there's no end point. It can always be deepened.
I miss the animation. It's great to rewatch it again, and your insights as well. And so, David, now putting this in the context of work relationships, how does who do you want to climb the summit with at work, and who do you want to be in the content meadow, or in the meadow with? How do we know who that is at various companies? Who we really want to kind of develop these relationships with.
Well, I think what we do is we look at who are the people we're interdependent with. And as Carole said, we do business with people. The organization is held together not by the organization chart, but by the network of relationships we build. So we identify those who are crucial for me to get my job done. Who do I need information from, support, resources, and so on? And I'm going to put more effort into that. And there are people also that I need to go to when I have problems. So Carole and I have used each other over the years when we've had difficulty, because we have a relationship where we trust each other. And you want that in the organization too. So you identify those who I really need in order to be successful, to get my job done. And that's where you put the effort into.
In the video book, you move on to explore how relationships exist on a continuum. Carole, could you walk us through this idea and explain the 6 hallmarks of moving from no connection or dysfunction to a robust and functional relationship?
Yeah, so as you just noted, relationships exist on a continuum, which at one end is contact and no connection. Those are your thousands of Facebook friends, or dysfunction. And at the other end of the continuum is what David and I came to call exceptional. It turns out, though, that along the continuum, there's also robust and functional, which is the meadow, which is the upper meadow in the terms of the metaphor. And it turns out that the skills required that are attached to the hallmarks that I'll talk about in a moment are, in fact, what you need to move along the continuum, even to just robust and functional. And then the more of that you do, and the more you deepen the relationship, the more options you have to go on to exceptional. I do feel compelled to say we are not in any way suggesting your goal should be to create exceptional relationships with everybody in your life. That is impractical. It is unnecessary. But what a great goal to have, to at least create robust and functional relationships with everybody in your life. Now, the 6 hallmarks are really about both of you allowing yourselves to be more known by each other, more fully yourselves, instead of hiding behind a spun image. It's the second one is about both of you being willing to be vulnerable, which is attached to the first one. You can't allow yourself to be more known if you're not willing to be vulnerable. The third is that you trust each other, and you trust that your disclosures won't be used against you. The fourth is that you're honest with each other. And I'm going to come back to that one in just a second. The fifth is that you learn how to deal with conflict productively. Not that you learn how to not have conflict. That's impossible. You learn how to deal with it productively. And the sixth is that you're committed to each other's growth. And I want to come back to the honesty for a moment, because we tend to think when we look at this model of this is the way to build relationships, and it's also a way to address what usually gets in the way of building strong relationships. Honesty being one of the crucial points here. In fact, David is known for saying, you can say almost anything to almost anybody, as long as you stick with your reality, which is a concept we're going to get to in a little while with you, Ronak. But the fact is, and then David always adds, we have to say almost because we're academics, and so we never make absolute statements. But at the core of this message is that we stop short, way short, of what we can share about ourselves and about the impact of other people's behavior on us. Way, way short. And in fact, being willing to push that envelope is what creates stronger, more robust relationships.
That's I can't wait for people to experience these in more detail in the video book. And David, so what is the role of inquiry and curiosity in building relationships, especially when people, sometimes are closed off to what you have to say?
Well, I think curiosity is really important, because when I'm curious about the other person, it conveys that I want to know you. It's a way to reach out and to connect with the other person. And I think what's important is that we be clear about the process of inquiry, because too often it can be playing detective and prosecuting attorney and asking sort of imposing questions. And we make the distinction between open-ended questions and closed questions. Closed questions can be answered in yes or no, and they tend not to reveal that much, because where they come from is a hypothesis that I have raised that I want to check out. Open-ended questions are really being curious, where we want to say, gee, that sounds like it's important to you. Can you tell me more about that? I don't know what the answer is. I'm not trying to reach an answer, but I'm trying to get to know you. And I think that if we can really have the desire of, that's an interesting person, and I want to get to know them better, and have that also be linked with, I want you to get to know me better, and I'm going to share things, as Carole said, that are personal, that may be a little vulnerable, but that in a sense says, I really trust you to share this part of me, and I hope that you also will share more with me. So curiosity is really important. And with curiosity, you don't go in knowing the answer. You go in saying, I want to find out more about you.
Yeah, and part of the key to this idea of relationship progression that you mentioned throughout the book is along the continuum of the act of building trust. I think that's very foundational to relationships. And in the video book, you suggest using the 15% rule to know how much to share. Let's take a look at what you mean by that right now in this next clip from the video book.
To know when and how much to share, think of interactions as existing in 3 zones.
We all have a comfort zone, and that's the stuff you say without thinking twice about it. And we have a danger zone, and that's stuff you would never tell somebody else, especially somebody else you just met in a million years. But there's this important zone in the middle, which is called the learning zone, and into which you have to venture if you're going to learn something new. Our students used to say, but Carole, the minute I'm outside my comfort zone, how do I know I'm in learning? How do I know I'm not in danger? So we came up with 15%. Try stepping a little bit outside your comfort zone. If you only venture 15% out, you're unlikely to freak yourself or the other person out because you've only ventured a little bit out. And then a really cool thing happens, which is that your comfort zone gets redrawn to a little bigger with that person. And then you can go 15% beyond that.
Carole,
Love that clip.
Would you, same here. Would you mind diving deeper into the 3 zones and how we can apply the 15% rule to everyday interactions that we have to deepen relationships with our communities?
So I think it's important to remember that relationships, that human beings are always works in progress. And therefore, relationships are always works in progress and dynamic. So, and every relationship is unique because every human being is unique. So my relationship with you is going to be different than my relationship with David. It's going to be different than my relationship with my husband. So what 15% outside my comfort zone might look like with you, who I've only just met and who I know somewhat, and in one particular context, might look very different than my 15% outside my comfort zone with my husband. And even though he's my husband, there are still opportunities to step outside my comfort zone in service of a deeper, more fulfilling relationship. Now, the 15% rule applies, and this whole idea of stepping outside your comfort zone and redrawing your comfort zone constantly applies both to disclosure. What am I willing to tell you about me? What am I willing to share? It applies to what am I willing to ask of you? Going back to the inquiry that David was talking about, sometimes it can feel a little risky to inquire, genuinely inquire, but I might be a little less comfortable asking you some questions than others. And it also applies to this point I made a little earlier about honesty. How much can I tell you about the impact of your behavior on me? And I might have to start with something small and see how that goes. And then maybe I'll feel, well, that went really well. I think I'll tell you something more. So it applies to every aspect of building a relationship, whether it's the disclosure aspect, the feedback aspect, what feelings am I willing to share with you, when and how. And it's a really core concept, and a lot of people don't realize that your comfort zone, if you're willing to step outside it, is grows. And then there's this, well, then you can go 15% beyond that. That's what I love about the clip, the redrawn comfort zone. Always remembering that it's a dynamic process, and my comfort zone right now with you may be different than my comfort zone 3 months from now with you. And again, varies by person, varies by situation, varies by context.
I'm really curious to, and maybe we'll get to this in the QA, maybe somebody has this question, but what happens if you break someone's trust? And then, how do you kind of think about getting outside your comfort zone then? And, but before we get there,
read the last chapter of Connect.
There we go. There we go. And David, over to you. So why do we disclose feelings? What are the benefits and the costs of self-disclosure in building relationships?
Well, feelings, emotions are crucial in relationships because feelings convey what is important to me. It conveys what I want, what I'm concerned about, what I'm disturbed about. So to really get to know me, you've got to know my feelings. If I don't share my feelings, I'm Mr. Spock of Star Wars, who may know all sorts of facts and be competent technically, but isn't a human. Feelings, in a sense, are what make us human. So in terms of disclosure, the 15% rule, can I share my feelings? Can I say, gee, I'm bothered about what's going on, or I really need to know more. I want to know more. I feel more comfortable when this occurs. Then you know about me. But also it's a way to do inquiry. I always urge, can I listen for feelings? When somebody else shares a feeling or there's a implied feeling behind it, can I start to get curious about that? Gee, you seem disturbed about what goes on. Could you tell me more about that? So feelings are also central to the feedback process, which we'll get to. Because as Carole said, when we say, when you stick with your own reality, you can say almost anything. What we're really going to be stressing is, can I share my feelings to your behavior, to your reaction? I don't want to share my interpretation of your motives because I'm not aware of that. I'm ignorant of that, but I'm very much aware of my feelings. And the trouble is, in our society, we tend to devalue feelings. We tend to stress rationality, which is important, but feelings are the parallel part. We tend to think in terms of music, that there's bass and there's a high soprano and so on. We need both of them to have really music, to have real music. So we need to share our ideas, but we also need to share our feelings. And what we find in this course is that often people are not in touch with their feelings. And one of the things that they learn is, what am I feeling now? And they learn how to share it in a way that builds connections.
At least personally, there's some people I feel very comfortable opening up and sharing feelings with versus others. You become very closed off and you have a very kind of transactional type of relationship. So yet another kind of really important concept from the book that stands out is how to address pinches before they turn into quote unquote crunches. So let's watch the clip from the video book now and chat about it.
If you don't raise a pinch, there is a chance that it turns into something worse, a crunch.
Maybe the annoyance does go away, but maybe it doesn't. And it happens again, and the pinch grows. And then I really get upset. So how do we know whether to raise a pinch or not?
To figure out whether or not to raise a pinch, don't ask, is it worth it?
Change the pronoun and ask yourself, am I not worth it? Are you not worth it? Is the relationship not worth it? And you may decide it is worth it.
Elena decides to give Sam feedback about what's been happening, but she does it in the wrong way.
Why don't you care about what I have to say?
What?
You deliberately gave Trevor credit for my idea, like 4 different times.
Okay, look, we're a team, right? When there's a good idea, we all win. It doesn't matter where the idea comes from, and I can't give you preferential treatment.
What? I'm not asking for preferential treatment. I'm asking for you to start respecting me.
Whoa, why are you attacking me right now?
The key to giving feedback correctly is sticking with your own reality.
I think this is a very, very relatable concept from the video book. I think addressing pinches before they escalate into crunches is something that all of us do, and we let things fester, and often don't know how to address the pinch in real time. So Carole, this one's for you. What advice would you give for identifying small issues in the moment, and how do we approach addressing them in a way that is safe and constructive as compared to what we just saw in the clip?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things here. One is it may be useful to think about this as each of us is equipped with two antennae. One antenna is an antenna that picks up what's going on for us internally, kind of like the one that says, oh, I'm annoyed. Oh, I'm more annoyed. Oh, I'm not annoyed anymore. That's so a little self-knowledge goes a long way here. The other antenna is the one that's picking up signals on what might be going on for you. And that one helps inform, is this the right time to raise something with you, et cetera. So one way to know that it's time to raise a pinch is to notice that this little mild annoyance that you had that you haven't said anything about, your internal antenna is telling you it is now a bigger annoyance. And so we're not saying every time you feel the slightest annoyance, you should say something. So it's important to note that what's important, that what matters here is you monitoring yourself and having some sense of whether or not you're getting a little bit more annoyed. But before you get to where Elena got, way before you get to where Elena got, you can raise an issue before you've become so agitated that you can't raise it and stick with your own reality. It's easier to stick with your own reality. This was the point I made earlier about honesty. If your own emotional state is not as heightened as hers has become. Here, the 15% rule matters again. So I might need to raise the pinch in a particular way with you, depending on our relationship, and I might need, and in a way that I raise it, in a place that I raise it, in the context that I raise it. All of those things are something to consider when raising a pinch. And I just want to underscore what David said in the video clip, which is most people say, it's not worth it. 9 times out of 10, if my feelings about it are rising and I don't say anything, it will have been well worth raising before they got there.
Yeah, this is a really challenging thing to identify, right? There's some people have the idea of being stoic as something that is really valuable, right? Where you kind of just, even if things affect you, you don't say anything, and time will pass and everything will be okay. But
until you blow,
it's very clear. Until you blow, exactly. Just like Elena did in the clip. So moving on now to our next topic here, and perhaps the most important for a relationship is the power of feedback as a tool for building relationships. You relate Sam and Elena's argument to the sport tennis, and then explore it through a personal example between you, Carole, and your husband. So let's take a look at the follow-up to the previous clip.
So we have the image of a tennis net between reality number 1, Sam's motives, intentions, and reality number 2, his behavior. Now in tennis, you can't play in the other person's backcourt. But so much of feedback is over the net. So at Stanford, we say, stay on your side of the net.
You deliberately gave Trevor credit for my idea.
Not going over the net is key to giving feedback, as Carole learned when she felt her husband wasn't listening to her.
When I say, you're not listening to me, I am over the net. I'm not in his head. I don't know whether he's listening to me or not. So if I can learn to say, when you make no eye contact and the only thing I get is a grunt, I don't feel heard. All on my side of the net. That's when he comes back and says, okay, well, if you want my undivided attention, then, let's figure out what we need to do.
So David, what makes feedback so effective in this context, and how can we use it more constructively?
Well, I think building on what Carole said and also what the video showed is that there are 3 realities. There's my intention, there's the behavior, and there's the impact on you. And so often what we do is we don't stick with the impact of the other person's behavior on me. What we do is we try to interpret their motives or their personality or their character, which is what Elena did. And in essence, we're over the net and we're moving from what we know to what the other person knows. The trouble with that is if I say, well, you just want to dominate, they can say, no, I don't. And we're stuck. We can go nowhere. It's debatable. I don't know. The other person knows. If I stick with my reality, which is what feedback should be, I need to share the impact of your behavior on me. How does it make me feel? How is it likely to impact my future behavior? How is it likely to feel? How is it likely to impact how much I trust you, how close I feel to you? So if I say to somebody, Joe, when you did that, I felt put down. Doesn't make me want to disclose a lot to you, and it really hurts our relationship. Joe can't say, no, you don't. He's over my net. I'm sharing my reality, which is indisputable as my reality. So that's the way in which to raise it. What's the impact of your behavior on me? How does it make me feel? How does it impact the relationship from my point of view? The nice thing about feedback this way is that if I make a characterological challenge to you, you just want to dominate. Not only is there no way to go, but there's no solution to that. But if I share my feelings and my reaction, what can happen is what Carole did when she talked about dealing with her husband, is we can now discuss it. So feedback starts a conversation. It shares useful data. This is what is happening to me. Then you can share what your intentions are. And as Carole said, then you can work out a solution that meets both of us. But you have to, in a sense, stay with your reality, which is why we say you can say almost anything if you stay with your reality.
It's a great tactic to not have the receiver feel immediately defensive and want to attack you right back. And Carole, now looking at the receiver a little bit, what advice do you have for how we can be more open to receiving and listening to feedback, and especially when it's difficult to hear with those challenging conversations, and what do we do with the information that is being received, even though it may not be something we want to hear?
So it turns out you can use the net just as effectively to be a good receiver. And the first thing I'll say is, I think there are a few things that leaders can model better in organizations if they're trying to build organizations with healthy cultures, then be good receivers of feedback. So you can use the net, you can use the model of the net, because most of the time people will be over the net when they give you feedback. So they'll say things like, well, obviously you don't care. That's over the net. Unless you've said, I don't care, that's over the net. So, I came into that meeting, you obviously didn't want to hear what I had to say. Now, it's easy to get to feeling defensive if that's not what I thought I was doing. But that's where the curiosity that David talked about earlier is so important. Wow, I'm obviously doing something. I wonder what it is that I'm doing. Now I can say, gee, rather than tell you that I care, could you help me understand what it is that I did that led you to believe I didn't care? Let's not argue about the caring. Let's get into the behavior. Let's get into reality number 2. What's the behavior? And then, telling somebody, I just want to hear how you feel. Well, I feel that you don't care. Doesn't have a single feeling word in it. So sometimes that's kind of a dead path until you teach people this model. Then they can say, we were in that meeting, 3 times I started to say something, 3 times you interrupted me. I felt dismissed, or I felt discouraged, but they normally don't start there unless they've been taught the model. And so there,
Right.
let's start with the assumption that the person who's come in here to talk to you with a piece of feedback has important data for you, as David said. Feedback is always data. And the question is, how can you put it to productive use? The purpose of feedback is to move into a constructive feedback, is to move into a problem-solving conversation, not to change me or the other person. So if I can go into a receiving of feedback with that spirit, not only are we going to solve whatever it is that's occurred, but we're going to create a deeper relationship, because embedded in any piece of feedback is some disclosure. I'm going to learn something about what's important to you and what you need when you give me feedback. And if I'm able to receive that in a way that helps you feel heard and understood, you're going to be likely to want to tell me more. And I'm going to want to tell you more, because disclosure is reciprocal, and we're going to build a stronger, deeper relationship. So, I think that the idea of the net is so powerful. It's also, by the way, powerful. And when giving somebody complimentary feedback, I use constructive compliment. I never use positive, negative. All feedback is positive. It's always data. But saying to somebody, good job, is kind of meaningless. Saying to somebody, wow, that's the third time you handed in that report early, and it was incredibly thorough, and you even picked up this and this, which I hadn't even asked for. I can't tell you how much I appreciate. That's reality number 2. That's what they did. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, and I can't tell you how much I am inclined to give you more responsibility if that's what you want and you have asked for. Compare that to nice job. So the net and the model of the 3 realities is incredibly powerful in building relationships.
Well, and what happens if somebody is giving you feedback that is maybe inaccurate or not constructive? How do you kind of react to that?
It would have to be inaccurate because they're describing a behavior I did not engage in. It's only if they're labeling me something, I can say that's inaccurate. That's over the net. But if they're saying you interrupted me 3 times and I didn't, then I have to get even more curious. Wow, I don't remember interrupting you. Can you tell me, do you remember a specific moment or an example? Because the worst thing that can happen is that in that moment, is for you to say, you're wrong. I never interrupted you. Well, that's not going to make the relationship or the conversation progress in any kind of a positive direction. Instead, activate even more curiosity. Try to get to the behavior and try to get to what is it that behavior is triggering in the other person. What is it that I did? And help me understand better what was the impact of that on you? If you don't want to use the feeling word, how did that make you feel? You can say, what was the impact of that on you? And because I can see that you're upset, and I'm just trying to get a little more granular so that I know how to respond in a way that I don't continue to do whatever it is I did that triggered this response in you.
The central problem when everything we're talking about is our tendency when we're bothered by somebody else's behavior is to jump to labels and assumptions about the other person. That's what causes defensiveness. And it's actually very hard to stick with behavior. But if you, in a sense, can say, I don't know what's going on within the other person. I only know what's going on within me and the behavior that I see. Then you don't fall into the trap of making assumptions about the other person. And it's the assumptions that cause defensiveness, that cut down on communication, that kill relationships.
David and Carole, thanks so much for taking the time to elaborate on your wonderful work with us. Now I wanted to shift our attention to Q&A from the audience. We have lots of questions from the attendees.
As teachers, all I can tell you is that is music to our ears, because when you get no questions, that's when you panic.
Yeah, well, we have a number here. So I'm going to start out with the first one. how can we cultivate deeper relationships with individuals we don't interact with regularly, such as senior management and investors?
I think what we do is we look for times in which we do have contact with them. So one of the troubles, for example, in organizations, particularly those which are international, is they may get together periodically for a couple of days retreat, and they spend all the time on task issues. That ought to be time in which you're building relationships. So you build relationships over meals, over coffee, over a drink. You grab somebody and say, hey, can we sit down and talk about this incident we had in which which didn't work out that well, because I don't want to have that happen again. So we need to make use of those few times with senior managers or investors and work on the relationship, because when we work on the relationship, then task issues will become better. But Carole, you deal with a lot with investors.
Yes, and I will add that in this day and age, so much work gets done on Zoom. And on Zoom, task gets even more foregrounded and relationship becomes even more backgrounded. So I have, for example, one of the activities that we do in Leaders in Tech, which is another lit, by the way, which is always confusing to me. There's two lits in my life, lit video and lit. One of the things we do as an activity with our CEO founders when we bring them together is we do an activity where before the meeting, before our session starts, each person takes 90 seconds to complete the sentence, if you really knew me, and then whatever they want to say in 90 seconds. And then the next person goes, and if you want to add another 30 seconds, you can say, anybody in the circle can say, when I heard you say X, I felt Y. Well, that process, that has become a norm in many of our CEO founders companies, where when they start a meeting, they spend the first 10 minutes, to David's point, you don't have to spend the whole meeting, but if you're not going to have lunch together and you're not going to see each other, they spend the first 10 minutes going around the circle with, if you really knew me. And I have a CEO who recently told me that he has a team that has never met, because they came into being during the pandemic. They remain a completely virtual team, and multiple members of his executive team have told him they have never felt closer to their fellow executives, and they have never met. So, it's possible. What matters is the quality of the conversation, not the quantity. And especially when you're limited, as David said, to very few opportunities, boy, make the opportunities count and create structures that make it easier for people to become more known to each other.
But yeah, I really appreciate when, having back-to-back calls and it's with, investors or senior executives, when people take the time to just speak about themselves. It makes it so much easier. I don't really want to hear about the weather, but I would love to hear more about who you are and a little bit about your personal life to build a relationship, right? So I think that's really helpful advice. Right, next question. Feel free to let me know whoever wants to answer first. So if the other person keeps going over the net or keeps trying to tell me my reality, what tactics can I use without telling them that in so many words?
Well, I think what I would start with is how does that behavior make me feel? And I would say, Mary, that's the third time you've made an assumption about my motives. That's not helping me. It's have to fight not to feel defensive. It would be much more helpful if you could tell me what it is that I'm doing, as Carole said. Can I push that person back over the net and say, can you tell me what I'm doing and how does it make you feel? So if they do it several times, that's a form of feedback I can give, sticking with my reality, pointing out their behavior, and talking about the cost to our relationship, to my willingness to be open, to my level of trust. So the model works even if they're over the net. And hopefully if I'm over the net, the other person will push me back. Then we can have a productive conversation.
And I would add, that's another time to double down on the inquiry. What is it that you need is a great question. What is it that would be really helpful to you right now? What is it that you want me to do? That in fact is, you got to give me a behavior you want me to address. So, and I think the more we can activate our curiosity in a moment like that, but our tendency is net jumping invites net jumping. So our tendency is to label them or impute a motive right back. So pretty soon, nobody's playing in their own court. And I like what David said that I want to underscore, which is it's okay to say, wow, it's hard for me to hear that and not get defensive. And I really want to understand what it is that's going on here, what it is that I'm doing, and what it is that you need. I think it's important. And until I understand what I need to do differently, I don't know that I can address what you're asking.
Another maybe challenging question here. So what is the best way to reignite a connection after falling out with someone, maybe recently or even a long time ago?
Okay, I got to jump on this one. I don't remember if this is part of the Lit video book, or because they're all kind of schmurgled for me. But David and I had a huge falling out. And in fact, there was a moment in time where I said I would never talk to him again. We had been colleagues and friends and very close friends and very close colleagues for 15 years. And I said, he did something, it doesn't matter what he did. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. And I said, I'd never talk to him again. And you want to know more about that whole story, read the last chapter of Connect. But the bottom line here is, this is where first we had to give it a little time. We had to wait for me to kind of calm down a little. Second, David never gave up. Just because he gave it time didn't mean that I didn't know he was always there, ready for the repair. If I wanted to. He also didn't push me into the repair sooner than I was ready. And then we were very well served by several colleagues and my family who all kept saying to me, Carole, how can you possibly teach what you teach and not engage in a repair conversation with David, your closest colleague of all time? I don't care. I'm just pissed. I'm never talking to him again. Eventually, my kids looked at me and said, Mom, I don't know how you can stand up in front of a bunch of students and never teach another class as long as you continue to, behave this way. So that was the conditions that led to some openness. Then, even more important was that once I was ready, David was always ready. We both went into the conversation with an honest desire, intention to figure out where we had gone so far awry. Not to blame, not to be right. In fact, the first thing we both had to let go of was that we were each right, because of course we both felt right. And instead, meet each other emotionally. So this is a really important concept, which is until I felt emotionally met about the issue that I got all worked up about, I wasn't ready to engage. And once I felt understood and met, and whether I was right or wrong in his eyes was no longer mattered, that he understood how I felt and I felt his understanding. That's what started to get us over the hump and gave us an opportunity to come back.
I can add to it. It was very powerful learning for both of us. And what I really want to underline what Carole said is her last words. can you understand the other? And we confuse understanding with agreeing. So I think both of us said, I don't agree with it, but I now understand you. And I think it's the understanding that's important that makes a repair. The other thing I would add is if this is a estrangement, and by the way, nearly 20% of the American public are estranged from a family member of one sort or another, which is a sad news. Can I start by saying, I'm really unhappy we're estranged. I'm not sure I need to rework the issue, but what I need to do is to see if we can have a relationship again. So in a sense, what I'm focusing on is what I want and not, as Carole said, not get into the blame game.
How do you build relationships with someone where you disagree on a lot of things, a lot of really important things? You may just be on total polar opposite sides. How do you kind of cross that bridge and build a relationship with someone if you want to?
This I think is where feelings are so important. And David talked about this earlier. First of all, feelings are universal. As human beings, we all have feelings. We all know fear. Whether we're afraid of the same thing or not matters a lot less than that we both know fear. We both know anger. So when we disagree, it's usually at the cognitive level. But if we can meet at the emotional level, then we're much more likely to have at least a more functional and productive conversation. And in this day and age, boy, the question is very germane. This country is completely divided, 50% in one direction, 50% in the other. And yet at the core is people are afraid of certain things. They're afraid. Some people are afraid of one thing. Other people are afraid of the exact opposite thing. Rather than stick there, let's stick with fear and what we do with our fear and how I might understand you being afraid, even if I could not disagree with you more vehemently. I know fear. That's why emotions are so powerful. I know disappointment. I know sadness. I know anger. The other thing that we haven't talked about at all is that anger is often a secondary emotion. And underneath anger, there's fear or there's hurt. And because we've been so socialized to leave feelings in the parking lot, especially in business, but somehow anger is okay because it's, not wimpy, not weak. Then what happens is we're really not dealing with the real feeling. We're dealing with something superficial, and anger is a distancing emotion, whereas sadness, fear, hurt, disappointment are all connecting emotions. Does that help?
And if I could add to that, I think that is really central. The other thing is there's some interesting research on the political divide. And what happens is we often first say, where do we disagree? And then we say, where are you wrong? What we don't start with is say, what are the areas we agree on? And there's research which shows that if we could find those areas we agree on and build on those, we're more likely to fully understand the other and not demonize them.
Yeah, and if you combine these two strategies, we both feel and we both know those feelings, and there are some things about which issues about which we agree, or views. Now combine those, now you got a pretty powerful way to address some of that estrangement. And by the way, something like leading
really
with
helpful.
intent. We didn't talk about that at all, but boy, lead with intent. I really want to figure out if there's a way for us to have a more functional relationship. It saddens me that we don't. Most people will respond positively to that.
Absolutely. And I think, relationships can definitely become stronger when there are things you disagree on, but you're still able to create that bond and find common areas where you do agree, and know that the idea of kind of aligning on certain emotions that you both feel to is really interesting. And a few more questions here. I know we're getting close to time. So one of them, in the Lit video book, you address relationship inequality. What type of equality should we expect in work relationships?
I'm not clear what they mean by equality. Are they meaning equality in status and power?
I think, yeah.
If that's
Status.
what it is, in essence, when there's not equality, partially we build inequality, we assume inequality. So you're my boss, and I therefore assume that there's less that I can say. That's not necessarily true. The problem is what I'm doing in assuming what I can't do with this inequality. We don't need to go into it, but both Carole and I have an example of actually our children who, in a sense, handled power equality in a way that equalized it. Now, a way to do that is to remember that when another person is doing something that's bothering you, it's also likely that that behavior is hurting them, not just you. We tend to focus on ourselves. So if my boss does something, cuts me off in meetings and puts me down, yes, I feel hurt by that. But my boss has said at other times, gee, I want people to speak up at meetings. Her behavior in that meeting, in a sense, has hurt the boss. I may want to go in and share my feelings, but I also may want to go in and say, hey, Mary, you've talked about wanting to have a team in which we can speak up and so on. I think what you did is making that difficult for people to do that. It's not helping me, but I also think it's not helping you. So again, we're finding some commonality, but I am using what I know, which is the observable behavior and the impact on me, and what I see is the impact of others, because others shut up for the rest of the meeting, to raise this in a way that's not accusatory, but is talking about the problem, which is the behavior.
And I'll add, which is, there are behaviors that we engage in that add to the power differential. There are ways in which we can either make ourselves smaller or make ourselves as big as we can and lessen the power differential. There'll always be a power differential hierarchically, possibly, but that does not necessarily, as David said, we both have kids who, completely disregard that there's a power differential. And in fact, it results in much stronger relationships among us. So, I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about power differentials and how to address them and ways that people give away their own power.
A small example. We often say, you interrupted me. That could be reframed as, I let myself be interrupted. So many things, as Carole is saying, that are power differentials, we need to look of, are we colluding into that?
It's a great example. I think we all fall victim to that. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up Q&A here. David and Carole, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. And just a few housekeeping items before everyone goes. If you haven't done so already, please check your registration confirmation emails. They'll be from Zoom. It should include, the way to access the Connect video book. And then, follow us on LinkedIn at Lit Videobooks to find out about our upcoming author fireside chats. And finally, if you're interested in learning how Lit for Teams can ignite engagement and micro-learning at your organization, if you're in learning development or HR or in people, you're eligible for a free trial for 2 weeks. So just go to our website, select Lit for Teams at the top of the screen, and share your information if you want to learn more. Thanks again, Carole and David, and happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. We
Pleasure.
enjoyed it.